Can you hear me?
Good morning and welcome to today's CFR virtual media briefing. I would like to remind attendees that this meeting is on the record. To ask a question during the Q&A period, please click on the raise hand icon on your Zoom window. When you are called on to speak, accept the unmute now prompt, then proceed with your name, affiliation, and question. Your video will remain off, but your microphone will be unmuted. Thank you, and Ambassador Froman, over to you.
Oh, well, thanks very much. Thank you all for joining us to discuss the strikes on Iran over the weekend. I'm delighted we were able to pull this together for our friends in the media, as well as our corporate and individual members of the council. As we head into this, a number of questions are top of mind. How far did these strikes set back the Iranian nuclear program? How will Iran respond? What will be the reverberation around the Middle East? What are the prospects for any diplomacy going forward? How will it impact U.S.-Israel relations? And more broadly, will these strikes bolster President Trump's credibility, and how might it change the international system? We're privileged at the Council to have a deep bench of experts on the Middle East and nuclear security issues to get at these questions. You'll be hearing from Max Boot, Jean Kirkpatrick, Senior Fellow for National Security Studies, Stephen Cook, Eni Enrique Mate, Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies, Dana Poneman, Senior Fellow, former Deputy Secretary of Energy, and Ray Takei Hasib J. Sabag, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies. We're also very lucky to have Farah Pandit, a Senior Fellow and an expert in the region in her own right, as our moderator for this conversation. And I would just add that our expertise extends beyond those on the call, including Elliot Abrams, Senior Fellow for the Middle East, and Ed Hussein, Senior Fellow, as well as many others who are writing on this issue. So I hope you will continue to look to the Council as a resource on these and related stories over the coming days and weeks, and we stand ready to be supportive and helpful to you in any way that we can. And with that, I'll turn it over to Farah.
Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. Dan, I'd like to start with you and talk about the tactical component of what we have witnessed in the last few days. President Trump, in his address to the nation on Saturday night, said that the objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear program. But others in his administration have since framed the objective in a less maximalist way as the delay or severe damaging of the program. If you could comment on what we know about what the U.S. has said it's achieved and what's the latest.
Well, we had follow-on briefings, of course, from the Secretary of Defense and from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What's clear is that in military terms, it was a very successful raid. The planes evaded detection. They evaded any enemy fire. They dropped 14 of these massive ordnance penetrators on the two major enrichment sites, Natanz and Fordo. According to General Kane, they performed extreme damage, severe damage to those sites. They had 24 Tomahawks then hit the Isfahan site. That's where the uranium conversion from a solid to a gas that allows it to be enriched takes place. But as General Kane said in his briefing, it's literally early days. Way too early to make a confident bombing damage assessment. So frankly, at this point, there's a lot more that we don't know than we do know. Clearly, the facilities that have the machines that enrich uranium and spin that material around have been severely damaged. What's left? What has happened to the actual 60%, 400 kilograms, 9 or 10 bombs worth of 60% enriched uranium product? We don't know where that is. There's been a lot of speculation in the press that trucks may have carted it away, but I think it's going to take some time, Farah, before we really know with any great precision what actually has been hit and what's left.
So what does that mean for the other sites in Iran, the 30 plus sites that are throughout the country?
Good question. So, as they say, you don't know what you don't know. And the problem with these kinds of facilities, and of course, Fordo itself was not known for quite some period of time, as we all know, is you can hide these things in caves and places, and there are sites that are known, and there are sites that they may have that we don't know about. That's one of the most challenging aspects about the whole non-proliferation regime. We have this really wonderful International Atomic Energy Agency, which is extraordinarily thorough, and they've got very great expertise. But if they don't have access to sites that have not been disclosed and they can't find out about them through other countries assisting them, then we can actually be a lot in the dark. Think of North Korea. There's a country where there's just a lot that went on that we never knew about until it was too late. So bottom line fare is there's probably a lot going on at those other sites that we just don't know about.
One last question before we turn to Max. Just because the audience is very broad today, we have both press and members and others. Could you just remind us the last time anyone actually inspected these sites and what we have for the last knowledge, rational knowledge piece here?
Yeah, well, the IAEA inspectors have been there, and Director General Grossi in May, just a few weeks ago, gave a very thorough report to the Board of Governors, and it was a troubling report in which he disclosed that they're not cooperating, and I'm sure that was one of the factors that led to this decision. But the IAEA has been there, and of course, Director General Grossi has been commenting and reporting to the Security Council subsequent to these events as well.
Great. Max, I'd like to turn to you, and I wanted to talk about the military component of this. President Trump said that he'd worked closely with Israel throughout the planning and the implementation. The U.S. military in the last 24 hours, the operation has been called by all accounts flawless. I'm just curious, was it flawless? And also, how should we be thinking about the U.S.-Israeli military coordination on the events of the last 10 days and what's happening now?
Well, I think the operation was tactically flawless for sure. I mean, the airplanes the strike package got in, got out, probably hit their aim points, but we don't actually know what the consequence of all that is. As Dan was just saying, it's going to take some time to figure out how much damage they actually did. And it's quite possible, I mean, I'm not saying this is likely, but it's quite possible that the attack could actually backfire if Iran retains enough highly enriched uranium and enough capacity to weaponize it, that it actually uses this attack as an impetus to acquire a nuclear weapon. At that point, nobody's going to look back and say, wow, what a tactically flawless strike, how great. It really depends on what the second and third order consequences are, which we're not going to know for some time. But clearly, to your other question there about the Israeli-U.S. coordination, obviously it was very tight. I mean, even just to have U.S. and Israeli aircraft operating in the same airspace requires a fair degree of coordination. And from all accounts, that's been a very tight relationship on the military side with General Eric Kurilla, who's the current head of U.S. CENTCOM, has very close ties with his Israeli counterparts. I would say, moving beyond from the strictly tactical military level to the political level, I would say that there is, a fair degree of cooperation between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. But there's kind of a sense that Netanyahu is the one who's really in the driver's seat, because remember 2 months ago that we were talking about distance and separation between Trump and Netanyahu after Trump kind of cold-cocked Netanyahu at the White House by announcing that he was going to launch negotiations with Iran and pressuring Israel not to launch a strike. And it's going to take a while to figure out everything that happened behind the scenes. But it seems to me that Bibi basically decided he was going to strike and drag the U.S. along with us. And at that point, once the Israeli attack began, that imposes a certain logic on Trump to join in, because I think the worst of all possible worlds is if Israel strikes, but Iran retains their Fordow site, and so they retain a lot of their nuclear program. That's definitely not in the U.S. interest. So I think there's no question that there is a tight relationship, but it really consists of Netanyahu in the leadership role and kind of dragging Trump along, reportedly in part because Trump is so impressed by the initial success of the Israeli airstrikes, he was more willing to join in and help.
Do you think that puts us in a corner? Does it put Trump in a corner? Does he have the ability to be creative about what he wants to do, or is he not able to do the operational changes that he would wish to do?
Well, I don't really know what the imagined end state is here for either Israel or Iran. I mean, I think in terms of military objectives, the best case scenario is we're going to set back the Iranian nuclear program for maybe a few years, which is less than what the JCPOA achieved in 2015. But at the end of the day, nobody imagines that this will permanently bar Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The question is, okay, if you've set them back and you've bought some time perhaps for yourself, and even that's not clear, but assuming you have bought that time, what do you do with it? I mean, what is the goal here? I mean, are we going to be able, I will defer to my colleagues Ray and Steve on this, but is this really going to make the Islamic Republic more likely to negotiate a more binding agreement or not? I think that's kind of the question that we're facing. Otherwise, we're locked in this kind of perpetual war with Iran where, every time there's any detection of any advance in their nuclear program, then, Israeli aircraft are going to wind up having to bomb again.
Your Washington Post article was outstanding, and I recommend it to everyone. But one of the things that you said was that the consequences of this are uncertain. And, as you have watched the reporting in the last 12, 15 hours about potentially Trump declaring on Truth Social sort of this deep fake of what he's going to do, it gave the Iranians an opportunity to think more creatively about what they want to do. How do you see, with everything that is moving in real time, this concept about being uncertain? Where's the political dimension of this? If in fact Bibi is the one who's running the show here.
I mean, these are all great questions. I'm not sure that there has been a carefully thought out end game here. I'm not sure that there's a strategy for translating tactical gains into political gains. I mean, Trump tweeted about unconditional surrender. I don't think that's going to happen. There's been talk from Prime Minister Netanyahu and others about regime change. We've had a lot of senior U.S. officials saying, no, this is not about regime change. Then President Trump takes to Truth Social and says, yes, this is about regime change. I mean, I think we have to make our goals as realistic as possible. And while we would all love to see regime change, I don't think that's a realistic goal in bombing Iran. A realistic goal is to try to get the Iranians to agree to a more restrictive nuclear accord in which they give up any ability to enrich uranium. And even that's going to be a tall order. But I think we need to keep it on the achievable, not on what we'd love to see happen, but have no strategy for achieving.
Great. I want to turn, you mentioned sort of the diplomatic angle in a bit, and Stephen, I'd like to turn to you on the diplomacy part around what Max was just talking about. The administration has voiced its hope that these strikes will bring back Iran to the negotiating table, this time with a genuine commitment to making peace. Vice President Vance's comments on Meet the Press yesterday seemed naively devoid of the Iranian perspective, dismissing Foreign Minister Araghchi's comments that the U.S. has blown up diplomacy. I have two questions for you. One is that, what has changed? Why did Trump do this after 5 rounds of talks with the Iranians? And then I'll follow up with you about the sort of the more regional response.
Well, I think there's 3 things. By the way, thanks, Farron. It's great to be with everybody. I think there's 3 reasons that Trump changed his mind. And again, I had no special ability to read the president's mind, but there's a couple of things that we can infer that had happened. One, Max alluded to one of them, which is that the president woke up on the morning of June 15th and was very impressed with the capabilities of the Israeli Air Force and what the Israelis had been able to do. In this early going, if you were, looking at Truth Social or any other social media, there was this kind of wild enthusiasm about what was going on and, kind of James Bond-esque exploits of Israel's Mossad. And so he was clearly impressed by it. And you saw as the days went on, he sort of leaned into Israel's Operation Rising Lion, and to the point where he said, we control Israel's airspace. Iran's airspace, which, was news to the Israelis, needless to say. And then I think that, people have used, the kind of unfortunate language about this when it comes to Israeli diplomacy in encouraging the United States to take part. And I want to be very, very careful here when the way I talk about it. The Israelis are looking at a challenge, a country that has invested enormous sums in developing nuclear technology. The reasonable suspicions that the Iranians would like to weaponize. Numerous Iranian officials have threatened the Israelis. The Iranians have funded proxies to attack Israel. So from the perspective of any Israeli prime minister, they would want American help in dealing with this problem. And I think the combination of the Israelis' success and at that moment, I think that the president was able to be convinced by the Israelis that this was both in Israel's interest as well as the American interest. This kind of language about dragging and Netanyahu in control and so on and so forth makes me very uncomfortable. The president of the United States is the president of the United States who has agency, and he could have demurred like his predecessors, but he chose otherwise. He saw something different. Maybe it was his gut. Who knows? And then I think the third thing is important is that the Iranians, after a kind of withering assault of the Israelis, their demands as far as nuclear negotiations had not changed. I think they never believed. They believed Taco. Trump always chickens out. They never believed that the president would pull the trigger, and he did. And so, but they remained steadfast in their basic demands. And I think those are the things that sort of changed between, let's say, June 13th and Saturday, or whenever the president gave the order for Operation Midnight Hammer. You had another question.
Yeah, I do, which is on the broader component of this and how how the region is really reacting. So I'd like to hop into that. But Max, before I do that, Max, do you want to respond at all to what Stephen said?
I mean, I don't disagree with what Stephen said. I mean, but I do think it is the case that Netanyahu figured out how to get Trump to the place where he wanted to be, and I think he gambled with the Israeli airstrikes, because at that point the signals Trump was sending was that Israel should not do this, but at least there was kind of at least a yellow light. But I think Netanyahu gambled that if Israel started this war and had some success early on, that rather than trying to shut them down, Trump would join in. And I think that gamble was vindicated. And you're right. I mean, ultimately, Trump is going to do what Trump is going to do for his own reasons. Nobody can dictate to him. But I think it's pretty clear that Netanyahu has used his relationship with Trump to get him to where he wants to be. And as you suggested, it's probably where any Israeli prime minister would want any U.S. president to be.
So, Stephen, let me come back to you and ask you for a snapshot of how the other Arab states are responding to all of this.
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you look at the statements after American strikes, there wasn't really criticism of American military action. There was a call for diplomacy, which is, I'm not a diplomat. No one would ever confuse me for a diplomat, but there is a difference there. And I think, similar to the beginning of the Israeli operations against Iran, I think where there was more criticism of the Israelis, but I think that the view has been, and this is the way it's been relayed to me, is, there's going to be a public message, and then privately, leaders in the Gulf in particular will privately admire Israel and the United States' proficiency, and the view that, look, the Iranians are a menace to the region, and doing damage to their ability to be a menace to the region is a good thing. But at the same time, there's a lot of concern about blowback on them and what the retaliation will look like, and will it affect them? Will there be damage to Dubai? Will there be damage to Dammam? How the Iranians go about doing this? That has been a consistent concern, and we know in the months leading up to this that Israel's Arab partners, and they are, for all intents and purposes, Arab partners, indicated to the Israelis that they were quite concerned about retaliation on their territory. And notice the air corridor that the Israelis established was through Syria and Iraq, not through Jordan, Saudi Arabia, or even southern through the UAE.
Ray, I promise we're going to get to you. I promise. But Dan, I know you're leaving soon, and I just wanted to pick up what Stephen was saying about the Arab response. Part of that response is fear of their own health and what could be happening with radiation. So could you give us a little bit of a view on how dangerous it could be and what you think is happening?
There can be some leakage. The leakage out of an enrichment site is not likely to be serious radiologically speaking. It's an alpha emitter. If there's a breach and you have the exposure to the air of the fluorine gas combining with the hydrogen in the air, you get a gas cloud and you have chemical hazards, but it's less of a radiation hazard than, for example, if there were an attack on the Bushehr nuclear power plant where you have, an active reactor, that would be a much more serious radiation hazard. But before I drop off, I just might pick up on some of the implications of both Max and Stephen's comments, in the sense that precisely because there's so much that we don't know, precisely because there are sites both known and perhaps not known that are out there, I do think that the critical issue now turns to diplomacy, right? Because, the implicit threat is if you don't cooperate further, there's more where that came from, right? And at the end of the day, we used to, when I worked on nonproliferation for decades, we did deals with North Korea, and we used to talk, in tongue in cheek about a precision guided document. The one thing that you can say, whether it was the agreed framework in 1994 or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015, is it did provide some certainty. And the IAE is really a wonderful organization, and they have cameras and they have SEALs and they have on-site inspectors, and it's much better to know what's going on than not to know what's going on, right? I mean, we learned that in Pakistan and India, didn't we? So I think now that it has been shown that the United States is willing to take these kinds of measures to enforce the red line of not getting nuclear weapons. Hopefully that will bring all the relevant parties into some kind of a diplomatic discussion that will lead to some settlement that will leave the region safe from the prospect of Iranian nuclear weapons, and not just some concatenation of ever more dangerous events.
Thank you, Dan. Ray, I have lots of questions for you. The first is Iran sufficiently weakened that it will return to the negotiation table, as the administration hopes, or will the regime respond militarily, and will it do so directly or through proxies, which is a huge question. I'm sorry for that, but the floor is yours.
In terms of negotiations, there's a kind of a narrative in Iran today that of American and IAEA perfidy, the idea that they entered an agreement and the Americans abandoned it. There's a lot of discussion that the whole Steve Witkoff negotiations were a ruse and they were designed to essentially establish the predicate for action. And there's a lot of, surprisingly, maybe, criticism of Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, particularly by people like Ali Larijani. They suggest that IAEA essentially gave the foreign armies the blueprints to the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. There's a lot of criticism of IAEA Board of Governors' rebuke of Iran recently that established a semi-legal predicate maybe for the attack. And so neither the interlocutors or the principal instrument of inspection regime is what you would call trusted in the Iranian body politic. Second of all, the country's leadership and the regime is not cohesive enough to be able to come to some sort of a negotiations at this point. Especially negotiations from the American perspective, whose conclusion is predetermined, namely zero enrichment. So the Iranian position, even today, is that they have a right to enrich. There has been discussion that they will not leave the NPT. I don't think they will leave the NPT, but I don't think they'll observe the obligations of the NPT and come to terms with Rafael Grossi. Dan mentioned the recent report that IAEA issued. One of the things that the two sides had done was negotiate what they call enhanced verification regime for Fordo. Well, that was actually agreed upon. Now, it hadn't been implemented. So there's a lot of suspicion about that, about entering negotiations. Javel said, if you say diplomacy never dies, and there's a possibility of negotiations taking place at some point, but I don't think one can assume that that's the pathway for dealing with the Iranian nuclear challenge or whatever remains of it. Retaliation, I don't think the country is in a position to retaliate at this point. First of all, just in terms of command and control and continuity of government, all that stuff that you need. To actually broaden the zone of conflict at this particular time seems unreasonable, but we're not living in a reasonable age. You're talking about traumatized political leaders in bunkers nurturing conspiracy theories. How they would react, I don't think it's reasonable for them to take on American Armada directly or indirectly, but I'm not in their position. Things that have happened to them recently that were unimaginable, and how they would react. I imagine there's some paralysis in the system at this point, just in terms of decision making. But I do think at some point they'll try to figure out how best to retaliate and when and in what manner.
Do you think that the strikes are going to create a rallying around the flag effect in Iran? I mean, people are hoping for that, but what do you think?
It's hard to honestly estimate that. The political elites of the country are united, even those members of the political elite that were critical of the Iranian decision making. So you see the unification of the elite society, left, right, and center. In terms of the public, they're the principal victims of this. Their lives have been turned upside down. I suspect they're equally traumatized. It is possible to come out of this experience blaming everybody. Blaming your national leadership for putting you in that position, blaming the outside powers for using force. I don't think the idea of nuclear science and achievement of nuclear science as pathway to economic modernity and industrialization was propagated by the regime for a long time. So what happens when this particular national asset is damaged, perhaps irreparably? I don't think Iran's going to come out of this experience with a civilian nuclear program anymore. It may come out of the surreptitious and clandestine weapons program, but the idea of nuclear energy as a pathway to industrialization is a narrative that's no longer holds sway.
We're going to, in a few minutes, go to questions. I have a lot more, but I see Max is in his airplane seat already. And so I want to just, before we go to the questions, allow the panel, if there's anything you want to comment on that we haven't directly addressed, please just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yes, please, Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say one thing. I did see the comments from Larry Johnny about Director General Grossi. That's extraordinarily dangerous and unjustified. I just think the records show, and I think probably all the people on the line know, that the IAEA has been an extraordinary organization in Iraq, and what Grossi has done in undergoing fire in Zaporizhia has been nothing short of extraordinary. So it's an obvious scapegoating kind of comment, but a dangerous one. And I think just everyone should know that the IAEA is extraordinarily scrupulous in the work that it does. And it reminds me a little bit of the case, I think Bertrand Russell criticized JFK at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and JFK said you should criticize the person who was stealing the cookies, not the person who caught them with the hand in the cookie jar. So the fact that the IAEA was doing its job and called out the fact that Iran was in fact violating their safeguards obligations and so forth, that's what they should be doing, and they should not be scapegoated because of that. And we need to be very careful to protect the IAEA and its integrity and the safety of the people who do that extraordinarily important work for all of us.
Max, did you want to say anything before you take off?
Well, I mean, I'll just say that I do think that the long fuse to the current conflict was really lit by President Trump in 2018 when he exited the JCPOA, even though the evidence was that the Iranians were abiding by it. And at that point, he said that he wanted to negotiate a stronger agreement. And unfortunately, we still have not negotiated that stronger agreement. And so now we have military action and this new war with Iran. And I think my hope, and I think everybody's hope, is that somehow this military action can lead to that stronger agreement with Iran in a much weaker position. But it very much remains to be seen, because I think as Ray said, I mean, there's even a big question as to whether the Iranians have their act together enough to even negotiate an agreement at this point. And certainly, I think Ray and Stephen can probably talk this more than I can, but I do think that the clerical regime is one that rules by fear, and they can't afford to be as unconditionally surrendering. And so I think it creates a dangerous dynamic. But I think basically we're still, at the end of the day, despite the initial success of the military action, I think we're still groping for that diplomatic solution, and I think, we had one that was admittedly imperfect and limited, but at least restrained the Iranian nuclear program in 2018. And now I think the question remains whether we can get to something stronger.
I have two quick questions before we turn to Sam for the audience. Stephen, I wanted to bring in Israel and wondered if you could comment on when you think the strikes are going to end and the perspective from Israel. And then Ray, I also wanted you to comment on what the U.S. administration ought to be thinking about that they haven't vis-a-vis Iran. So let's first go to Stephen and then to Ray.
First, I just want to say that this is not how I imagine Max Boot travels, but it's totally fine. Look, I've had, contact with some official circles in Israel.
Still my private jet from Qatar.
Look, I think the Israelis, the Israeli chief of staff Eyal Zamir made a statement before the American strikes, telling the Israeli people that they should be prepared for a longer conflict. Privately, the IDF, which has been providing briefings to folks like me, have said things like a week ago that they had about what they estimated a week left on their target list, and that when they exhausted that target list, they will wait for direction from the political leadership. They've recently said that they now have a number of days left, which is sort of consistent with what they originally said about 2 weeks. If you notice, the targets that they went after today was Fordo, as well as those parts of the Iranian state that are dedicated towards political and social control, besiege headquarters, a variety of other things along those lines. So I think the barely implicit goal here for the Israelis is to weaken the regime and hope that the Iranian people take matters into their own hands. Israelis, I've tried to keep up with just Israelis who I know. Their view is, first of all, this has been an extraordinarily scary situation for them. The ballistic missiles are different from rockets from Hezbollah and Hamas, and it has made an impression on people. And there's been death and injuries, less than what the IDF and the Homeland Command had suspected, but still, it's quite scary. And so their view of the American strikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan has been, we hope this is the beginning of the end of everything, that we can live not under the threat of Iran's nuclear program, and that it will finally provide an opportunity with the Iranians weakened for the Israeli government to bring hostages home and bring this terrible situation in Gaza to an end. That is where they are responding to. There is a certain stiff upper lip aspect of it, but I think that there's a lot of political support for what Prime Minister Netanyahu has done in Iran, and a tremendous amount of support for what the United States has recently done, which is in stark contrast to the way in which Israelis have come to view their morally ambiguous at best operations in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you. And Ray, what should America be thinking about that they haven't thought about in terms of tactical proficiency and strategic success?
First, this is exactly the way I envision Max traveling. Dan is the one with private jets. So just get that. Let's get that sorted out. The position of the international community today actually is zero enrichment. When Abbas Araghchi met his European counterparts, their position was zero enrichment, proscribing indigenous enrichment. That wasn't a European position the day before Israeli attack. That wasn't having the international community's position since the advent of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So that position seems to be quite maximalist. I would say, in assessing the situation in terms of the administration should obviously work on force protection and other means like that. That seems obvious, but we tend to forget in situations like that other countries have politics, and their politics tend to be volatile at this point. I don't know if Ali Khamenei can actually impose a consensus on the system. He may, if he physically survives, he may continue to become a leader, but he certainly will not be supreme. And while a lot of people are looking at a challenge from the population, from the larger society, he has to be concerned about the challenge from the right. The right means the elements of Revolutionary Guard and others who essentially been saying since the Israeli attack on Gaza, that if Prime Minister Netanyahu changes the rules of the game, so should we. And there was actually loud calls for nuclearization of the program, which he seems to have resisted. So he's in a lot of trouble with his core constituency that he needs now for maintaining power. I don't know if this system can come together at this point and actually offer a zero enrichment proposition. Zero enrichment, they rejected it. They took a considerable degree of economic penalties because of that, and now they've been bombed. So I don't know if coming out of that, Ali Khamenei has sufficient stature or authority to impose that kind of a maximalist demand on his constituency. By the way, when we say negotiations leading to zero enrichment, that's kind of a capitulation. That's not negotiations. That's essentially you go in and accept the surrender terms which have been offered to you on social media platforms. I don't think Ali Khamenei can survive that politically if he does that.
Thank you so much, Ray. I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who will give us instructions on asking questions.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, to ask a question, please click on the raise hand icon on your Zoom window. And when you are called on, please accept the unmute now prompt and proceed with your name, affiliation, and question. And we particularly welcome questions from members of the media. We will take our first question from Jim Puzangara.
Go ahead, Jim. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jim Puzangara from the Boston Globe, Washington Bureau. This might be outside your expertise in terms of potential retaliation, but I'm wondering how likely are Iranian-backed terrorism attacks, cyber or conventional, in the U.S. in response to these strikes? And if there's any concern, given that the Trump administration has reportedly shifted counterterrorism resources the past several months to immigration enforcement, about our ability to detect and deter those sort of attacks?
Jim, that's a great question. Thank you. Who would like to answer it? Stephen, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I can at least start with the question. I think that we do know from past history, and I defer to Ray on what he views as the actual capability here, but we know from history is that the Iranians do have a global reach, everywhere from Europe to Latin America, if you go back to the early 1990s. And the capability, the Iranians are the people that they pay to do a lot of damage to people. And so I think at least American officials need to keep it within their, kind of realm of what they think about in terms of potential threats as a result of this action that the president has taken. Certainly, the Iranians have been capable cyber warriors attacking Israel, going after their transportation system, their water system, and so on and so forth. Those attacks weren't successful, but certainly you learn in the process. So I think that these kinds of things are possible, and things that, again, the realm of things that I think American officials should be worrying about. I only know about what's gone on in the federal government from what I read from in papers like the Boston Globe, and so that worries me. If all of those resources have been shifted to immigration enforcement, that we aren't paying attention to these threats that may be upon us, whether that's realistic or not. I don't know, but that seems to me there's a history of the Iranians doing these kinds of things outside of the Middle East, and it seems to me, based on what I read, that we are less prepared than we were as a result of the focus on immigration enforcement.
If you'll permit me, as moderator, and it's my hometown paper, so I just want to say one thing to add on to what Stephen is saying. The CP3 office at DHS has been, it's now run by a 22-year-old. The grants that are partnership grants on the grassroots level with American NGOs that are looking at the ideology and what is inspiring have been closed down. So to me, the threat level in the United States around the ideological implications of both Gaza and what's happening in Iran is really important for us to look at through the CT perspective. Ray, did you want?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. Stephen is correct about the capabilities, although I think they're diminished. At this particular point, the principal concern of the Iranian security services would be profound counterintelligence cleansing of the system. As tactically brilliant as Israelis are, they couldn't have done this without a lot of domestic accomplices. So that's the first thing that happens. But whenever you begin to purge your security services, that essentially engenders hostility, suspicion, and so that creates further paralysis in the system. But the first challenge of the day is, how did this level of penetration come? And this is not the first time Israelis have done this, and they have to kind of sort it out. Now, the real answer to that question, where Israelis are able having this kind of penetration, because there's so much dissatisfaction with the regime. But that is not the answer they're going to come to.
Max, do you want to say anything before we go to the next question?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's a reasonable question to ask, and to keep in mind that Iran has a very long history of supporting terrorism, dating back to the 1980s, and they have inflicted massive losses on the U.S. going back to the, Marine barracks bombing in Beirut in '83, the attacks on the U.S. embassy. So, there's a long history of Iranian terrorism against the U.S., and that is something we need to be very much on the guard against.
Thanks so much, Max. Sam, can we go to the next question, please?
We will take our next question from Gary Seymour.
Hi, Gary. I think you're on mute.
Thanks very much. This has just been a terrific discussion. I have a question about Russia for Max, if your plane hasn't taken off yet. I mean, obviously the Russians have made noises, but they haven't lifted a finger to help Iran. And Trump doesn't seem to be interested in Russian involvement in mediating an end to the conflict. But what implications, if any, do you see for the Ukraine war? Does this create some openings for the Russians they didn't have before, or will they suffer because Iran can't provide them drones anymore?
I don't see it as having a big impact on the Ukraine war, because although Iran was very helpful at the beginning stages in providing Russia with drones and Shahed, Russia has now started manufacturing their own version of the Iranian drones and have actually kind of souped them up with jet engines and stuff. So I don't think that they're as dependent upon Iran as they were in the past. At the moment, I think they're actually a little bit more dependent on North Korea. So I don't think it has a huge impact on Russia, but it is interesting that, Russia is kind of, it's sort of really amusing to see, Vladimir Putin denouncing unprovoked aggression. Truly, dictators have no sense of irony. But I think it also shows that Russia is not a very valuable friend, because they're not really lifting a finger to help their allies in Iran in return for all the help that the Iranians have given them. But again, these are all, I would say, pretty low-level consequences. And as you can hear, I think they're trying to get us to taxi up to the runway here.
Max, thank you for joining us. And I'll say goodbye before you take off. Stephen or Ray, did you want to comment on Gary's question? Okay. Sam, can we please go to the next question?
We will take our next question from Charles Delfer.
Please go ahead, Charles. And identify yourself, please.
I'm Charles Delfer, relevant here. I used to do the weapons inspections in Iraq, and my question is on that point. I'm wondering if there is, in the context of a political solution, is there any thought and attention being given to more extensive inspection authorities to include going beyond what IAEA does? The reason is, having blown up the country now, it makes making a material balance extremely difficult. It's the circumstances we encountered in Iraq. It's also a case where it becomes more of a coercive disarmament as opposed to a voluntary one. And I just wonder where that stands in the consideration of a political settlement. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charles. Stephen, do you want to take that, or Ray?
I'll just say one thing. The Iranian nuclear program was under what was called additional protocol, which essentially was an enhanced inspection regime, but that obviously has gone away with their lack of adherence to it. There's going to be a challenge in terms of actual inspection, simply because if the view continues to be that IAEA is an instrument of Western espionage now, then it's difficult to see which neutral international body is going to step in here to actually conduct that inspection regime.
Stephen.
I was just going to make that point about the IAEA based on what Ray had said about the IAEA previously. I don't know where this inspection regime would be situated.
Thanks so much, both of you. Sam, could you kindly take the next question?
We will take our next question from Paul here.
Yes, this is Paul Hare from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I wondered if the panelists could speculate on the decision-making process at the White House behind these strikes. What do we know or think about who was advising Trump on this decision? Who might have been trying to outline the pluses and minuses of a strike? Basically, how confident are we in the strategic calculus behind this decision? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paul.
I'll take that. Look, let's just take it back a few months or less than a month or whenever it was, when the president essentially fired Mike Waltz, his national security advisor. And then a number of weeks later, the administration greatly reduced the National Security Council staff. It created this kind of storm in Washington, but it was not obvious to me that President Trump wanted a traditional national security advisor or needed a national security council from his perspective. And I think this is one of the reasons why actually the Gulf leaders really like him, because he makes decisions like they do with like 5 other people. And those 5 other people in the room have been Witkoff, so on this decision, have been Witkoff, General Kurilla, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, and I believe Susie Wiles. Perhaps Marco Rubio was involved as well, but Tulsi Gabbard was not. Whether that was she decided not to attend or was not invited to attend because he didn't like what she had to say on this issue. But that tight circle, Wiles, Witkoff, Kane, Kurilla, and possibly Rubio were in the room.
I don't have anything to add to that other than Stephen didn't mention Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth.
Who wasn't there?
This is kind of a big.
He wasn't there.
I'm hearing from some of my colleagues at CFR that Qatar has just closed down their airspace. So I just want to let Ray and Stephen know that, and our audience. And let me just follow up on one component of this, who's around advising the president. Stephen, there's been a lot of talk about parallels between 2003 and Iraq and decision-making. When you hear those kinds of questions, do you see a similarity, or how are you responding to that?
I can understand why people might go to that, but these are vastly different situations. And how decision making, there was a very significant apparatus of the U.S. government that was involved in the decision making and advising and policy process, regardless of how you felt about the invasion of Iraq. There was that machinery of government that was at play there. I think that obviously isn't the case here. The president doesn't like process. I think that the missions are different. I think that if we get into regime change, it's because the president has backed the United States into regime change, because the strikes did not totally obliterate, or whatever words he used, and he's confronted with a country that is racing to weaponize, as Ray has mentioned, and the Iranian people, and that, then you leave it to the Iranian people to bring down the regime with, I guess, American encouragement. But he's confronted with an excruciating problem, in that he might have to confront a weaponized Iran, which was not his intention, the solution of which is the end of this regime.
Can I just very briefly say, there is some vague. During the Bush administration's decision, it appears to me, and when I talk to people, nobody advised George Bush not to do it. Yeah. Did everybody think it was a good idea? Colin Powell didn't tell him not to do it. In this particular process, there was one person who was essentially said to President Trump not to do this, Tulsi Gabbard. Whatever you think of her, her exclusion from the Council of Decision Making means essentially opinions that are dissenting from the consensus are not allowed. That is not a good thing for decision-making process. then essentially means that the permission to enter the room, you have to first have agreement and not necessarily criticize or dissent from the decision making.
I don't know why that should surprise us, knowing what we know about the president's style.
It's an excellent point, Ray. Thank you. Sam, I'm going to turn to you for the next question.
We will take our next question from Serge Schmemann.
Great.
Yeah, hi. Great discussion. Thank you. I had a question basically for Steve. You discussed the goals that Israel and the United States have, which are not entirely the same. So my question to you is, to what degree are they acting in concert at this stage? And then building on what you said before, but this is pure speculation, so maybe you can't or don't want to answer, but might this make Trump a little more dangerous? Maybe he's going to be a little more happy to use force in search of deals in the future.
Thank you.
Well, actually, Serge, let me start with the second part of your question. I mean, if it seems to me that the president is always looking for leverage. He's the master deal maker, and you need the leverage to get the deal. So if he believes, and that may have been part of his thinking here, is that this will give him leverage for diplomacy and to get the better deal. That's where we get to your first question, where there may have been extraordinary IDF, U.S. Armed Forces cooperation and precision, and Israelis and Americans operating in the same airspace. It is not at that level where there is going to be differences. It's where the president says, "Oh, now I have more leverage with the Iranians. Let's get a deal," and that deal may not be something that sits well with the Israelis, which also gives you another sense of why they themselves went after Fordo today. I think it's one. Whatever their view is of the effectiveness of the American airstrikes, and also to send a signal to everybody that they went into this as an Israeli operation pursuing Israel's interests, and they'll finish it that way.
Ray, did you want to comment on that? Okay. Sam, if we can go to the next question, please.
We will take our next question from Jonathan Hilsinger.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Jonathan Hilsinger with the Department of Defense. My question is, short of capitulating for Iran, the window of opportunity for diplomacy here, if the United States is going to search for a deal, what levers does the president have to bring Israel to the negotiating table, who has basically said that they are not willing to accept a nuclear program and has actually taken military force, initiated this military conflict to achieve that end?
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Stephen, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I don't think that the president. I mean, in theory, the president can use leverage, but if you don't use leverage, you don't have it. And so he could, there's a whole range of things that he can do, but clearly, he's not prepared to do that. And the Israelis, as I was articulating before, will not be satisfied with any kind of deal unless their interests are met. And I haven't seen a deal yet in which they are satisfied. And again, you can understand that if you're sitting in Tel Aviv and the Iranians are developing a nuclear program that you have every reason to believe they're going to drive for weaponization, and they have funded all of these groups that have sought to attack you, and that you believed up until October 7th, 2023, your deterrence would work, and now you have to believe people when they say they want to kill you. So this is a major complication in the U.S.-Israel relationship. And it has been a complication in the U.S.-Israel relationship. It has been accentuated since October 7th, and that first the Biden administration, then the Trump administration wants deals, and the Israelis want victory. It's Prime Minister Netanyahu himself said it on October 9th, 2023. We're out to change the Middle East because that will be better for our security.
Ray, did you want to comment? Okay. Sam, can we go to the next question, please?
We will take our next question from Gray Hepner.
Terrific.
Hi, Gray Hepner, U.S. Army officer, retired. I wondered if you could speculate further on the instability of the Iranian economy and populace in terms of whether they might at some point be driving force for concessions or regime change. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
The Islamic Republic has, for past 46 years, always faced a popular insurrection almost ritualistically and on calendar. 2017, 19, 22, there will be another opposition group at some point, triggered by events that are almost impossible to predict ahead of time. The question, therefore, will be, can a weakened regime be able to deal with that more effectively? Does it exercise the same domestic controls? Islamic Republic rules by fear. To there, the fear barrier is down. So the question is it going to stay down? What are the regime's vulnerabilities? And so on. That's almost impossible to predict ahead of time. You're talking about sort of a revolutionary uprising. The question will be when a popular social protest movement takes place, and it certainly will, because that's the history of the Islamic Republic. How will the regime be able to deal with it in the aftermath of what is largely perceived as losing wars? Losing wars abroad doesn't help you at home, particularly because your authority is based on your strength and your valor and so on and so forth. So we'll see.
Ray, if Khamenei is dead or he dies soon, there
Yeah.
is a plan of action. So could you comment a little bit about what happens next?
That's a very good question. Even before these events, the question of succession had come, and there was the issue of maybe establishing some sort of a well, constitutionally, statutorily, the Assembly of Experts would be responsible for choosing the next leader. That's the body of 88 elderly clerics. Now, but that's in practice has never been the case, and the Islamic Republic only has had one succession to that position. Today, if there is a succession, if he dies tomorrow, the predominant voice in selecting the new leader will be the Revolutionary Guards. It is often said, and I don't think that was ever true about the Islamic Republic, that they're going to go with the way of the Prussia, where you used to say in Prussia, the army has a country, as opposed to the other way around. But today, there will be the predominant voice. And there's some reporting that Ali Khamenei has actually yielded to them important controls moving forward.
Thank you. Stephen, did you want to comment at all? Okay. Sam, we're going to take the last question, and then I'm going to ask Stephen and Ray to include in that any final words that they want. So we have about 4 minutes left. Thank you.
We will take our next question from Aaron Dumbacher.
Hi, Aaron. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Question for both of you about how you might rank order the likeliest and most immediate responses, perhaps militarily or otherwise, that Iran and Israel might take given the U.S. events. We had the question earlier about cyber attacks and the like, and obviously we've briefly talked about force protection for U.S. forces all in the region, but how would you rank sort of the first 1, 2, or 3 likeliest next events we will see?
Great question. And just a reminder, Ray and Stephen, just add into that any other final things you want to say before we close. Stephen, please go ahead.
Well, I'm intrigued by the reports that the Qatar is closing their airspace. I wonder what that is about, but until we have more information about it, I don't really want to speculate. Look, I think that Ray's point about the regime being in disarray and being focused on, sussing out who helped the Israelis with all of this is well taken, but I think probably you don't have to be as coherent to do a cyber attack or to, try to bomb a Jewish center somewhere around the world. I think that those are strong possibilities. I don't know how to rank them per se. As far as Israel's response has been continuing. The United States dropped massive ordnance penetrators on Iran's 3 main nuclear program facilities, and the Israelis have continued their airstrikes as they go down their target list. So again, I don't know how to rank order them. I'm just worried about things like cyber and terrorism and so on and so forth. And I think we should be aware of those contingencies. As far as my last comments go, I think there's a stunning irony in all of this. The president was in Saudi Arabia about 3 weeks ago, in which he excoriated nation building, regime changers, and so on. And it was a good speech. It was a very good speech. He said, we should leave it to the people of the region to develop, to pave the way for their own paths and so on and so forth. And now he's talking about or leaning into this idea of regime change. I think it's probably unlikely that the United States is going to go that far down the road. The president will drop this issue eventually. But what I do think will be the case is that we will be in the region it will have a larger American footprint in the region than I think the president imagined when he took the oath of office, because we're likely going to be confronted with an Iran that is beyond the diplomatic agreement and that is searching for ways to weaponize what's left of its program. And that means a mission of deterrence and containment, which neither precludes dialogue nor military action, but it does mean a more robust presence for the United States in the region than I think he or anybody else had envisioned when he became the president.
Thank you. And Ray?
Traditionally, the way the Iranians approach superior powers is indirect attack using proxies and allies, because traditionally and historically, indirect attacks have immunized them from retaliation. Whether those rules apply today, I don't know. And I would say, so that would be the logical way of responding. Again, but this day, those rules not apply. I want to pick up on the last point that Stephen made. We're in a new era of counterproliferation, kinetic counterproliferation. Before, we thought of counterproliferation as arms control agreements, inspection regimes, and the debate was whether the arms control agreements are strong enough and inspection regimes intrusive enough. Now it's going to be national intelligence communities reporting on surreptitious clandestine activities that can only be disarmed to the use of force. So what we saw in the past week, maybe not to this degree, is likely something repeat itself. Israelis or American intelligence or somebody, French intelligence, will say there's a suspicious installation somewhere doing suspicious things. Iranians will not grant access, and whether you want to take military action. So we're in a new era of kinetic counterproliferation. And also, I don't know what the lessons of the international community from this episode is. Yet another episode in a long story that if you have the bomb, you don't get bombed.
Well, that's a great way to end, Ray. I just want to remind the audience that CFR has a lot of material on their website. If you're interested in these subjects and more, please go to cfr.org. And then in addition to that, I want to thank my panelists, some of whom are still with us for a really important conversation. With that,
Thank you, Farah. Thank you.
Have a good and safe afternoon. Bye-bye.
At this time, you are welcome to disconnect from this virtual meeting.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. That's a meeting in here.